Other comments on today's program or questions or anything? Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few questions for Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. I was in Lubbock in 1980. I went to Texas Tech. I was in engineering school as a freshman in 1980. And for those who don't know, the reason the roads have to be straight in Lubbock is because of the dirt storms. And when the dirt blows there and the street lights come on, you can't see where you're going. So your best strategy is hold your steering wheel straight and keep driving in a straight line. And that generally works out. I noticed that you made it to Time Magazine 100 Most Influential People in 2014, and congratulations on that. I don't know if I'm the most influential person in District 6, so you're way ahead of me there. But I do have a couple of questions. I've been looking at global warming questions and now climate change. And maybe I'll make a few comments and you can respond. One of the problems I think global warming had was the science is very, very, very complicated, and you would know that. And some of the satellite data we had of the tropospheric lower stratosphere, when we started to get this data in the 80s, which is also a problem, right? Because we have like 30 years of satellite data, and the world is maybe millions of years old, and we're looking at 30 years. Kind of a big problem. But it actually showed that temperature was declining, while some of the ground temperatures were increasing. It's a lot of confusion in this. But I have a really visceral reaction against the climate change argument, for the simple reason that when you look back in time, and there have been dramatic climate changes before humanity ever existed. So the problem with climate change is if the climate changes, of course you can say climate change. If the climate does not change, that's climate change. Because for eons of time before humans existed, there has been climate change. So climate change is normal. But the way the politics of this is set up is if it changes and gets hotter and drier, climate change. If it gets cooler and wetter, climate change. If there's no climate change at all, it's climate change. I see Chicken Little in this whole thing, if you think about it, because you can now say everything's climate change, and no matter what happens, it's all climate change. And the worst thing that could be done to humanity is put government bureaucrats in charge of carbon dioxide emissions or whatever it would be. Because there's no way to have a definitive science on something so nebulous and so foolish as climate change. And I got one final point. You don't have to be as smart as a fifth grader to know that what causes the climate is the sun. The sun. I have people telling me carbon dioxide warms the earth. No, it doesn't. The sun warms the earth. And there is more energy in our sun than humanity can comprehend. And one solar emission, right? One of these coronal mass ejections, staggering amount of energy. They don't have to get a permit from the EPA, and they wreak all kinds of havoc, right, on our satellites and our. I'm sorry, I could go on and on, but I think you get the drift. So I'm really, really upset about this political move of saying climate change. Now we have to have the government in charge of climate. It angers me, and I think it should.
I think if the EPA could be in charge of the sun, that might create bigger problems than we have today.
Well, that's the plan.
Yes. No, I appreciate your comments. And so let me respond very briefly, because this could be the topic of a whole day of getting into the fun science, which is what I like. There are a lot of really good questions, and you've gone through quite a few of them right here. And so one of my personal favorite resources is a website called skepticalscience.com, and its motto is every true scientist should be a skeptic. I love this website because it's gone through and it's taken every single major question that we hear about climate change. Hasn't climate changed in the past? It certainly has. Isn't the sun the main factor controlling the Earth's temperature? Absolutely. Aren't there natural cycles? Yes, there are. Wasn't there some satellite data back in the 80s that showed that the atmosphere was cooling? There was, until they found that they'd switched out a plus and a minus sign in their code. So I love this website because it doesn't just give opinions, it actually links to scientific data and scientific facts. You can read the papers yourself if anybody wants to. So I recommend that website, skepticalscience.com, to anybody who's interested. Let me respond very briefly, though, to the gist of your comments, and that is that I think you were very clear, and what you said agrees very closely with the research, in that the main reason we object to the reality of this problem is because the solutions that have been presented are big government solutions. And so that's why I think it's so important to give free market solutions a voice in this argument. Because, as my husband says, a thermometer is not Democrat or Republican. And when we look around this world, it isn't about trusting what our 30-year-old satellites say. It's about looking at 26,500 indicators of a warming planet. Many of them we can see in our own backyards. It's also about looking at records, and this is what we climate scientists do. We look at long records going back thousands and even millions of years. And when we see that climate has changed significantly. We also see that today, if climate were changing because of the sun, we'd be getting cooler, because energy from the sun's been going down over the last 40 years. If it were changing due to orbital cycles that bring our ice ages and our warm interglacial periods like we're in right now, our temperature peaked 8,000 years ago, and we were actually in the long, slow slide into the next ice age until the Industrial Revolution. So just circling back to my road analogy, as humans, what we want is we want a stable climate. We don't want it to be colder. We don't want it to be warmer, because we've built this vulnerability into our system. So, for example, if climate were changing naturally 1,000 years ago and sea level went up 3 feet, and we lived in Houston, what would we do 1,000 years ago? Pick up the tent and move. If rainfall patterns shifted and we couldn't grow our crops here anymore 1,000 years ago, what would we do? We just move 100, 200 miles north. The reason why we care about a changing climate is because we can't pick up and move anymore. And so warmer or cooler, it's just as bad for us. We like it nice and stable. Thank you.
Thank you.